Well, good morning. Here's another installment, and we're going to make it a fun day. It's Friday, and Friday is, I think, by everybody's measurement, the most fun day of the week. It's the entry to the weekend. And today I want to ask some very general trivia questions. And you'll have to answer at home. I'll pause after I ask the question and see if you can come up with the answer. And you'll have to keep score, and there's 10 points for each right answer, and so a possibility of several hundred points here on the line. We don't have any prizes. You get bragging rights because you knew as many as you can name. But I want to start off by asking you, and I'll give you some hints too, but what is the tallest building in the world? At one point in time, it was the Empire State Building. Then that was eclipsed by the Sears Tower, and then it has moved on. It's not in the United States. So what is the tallest building in the world? And I'll give you a moment to think about it. You can consult Siri, but that would be cheating. But it is called the Burj Khalifa, and that's in the country of Dubai, and it is 20,720 feet tall. So it's a pretty tall structure. The next question is, what is the most populated city in the world? And I remember maybe 10 or 12 years ago, it was Mexico City, which had over 20 million people. Mexico City is no longer the most populated city in the world. And I'll give you a moment to think about it. It has been that way for the last couple of years. If you don't know it, it is the country of Shanghai, which is part of China. And Shanghai has a population of 24.2 million people. And here's some easier ones now. And we're going to have different categories here. So this is kind of like a world knowledge. But we're going to kind of go down to maybe animals and space. And there's some fun trivia facts from the 1920s, if you can guess those as well. But what is the largest ocean in the world? You may have learned this when you were probably back in the 5th grade. What is the, and it hasn't changed, by the way, what's the largest ocean in the world? And if you guessed Pacific Ocean, you are right. Now, I'm going to ask you another question that I'm sure that most of you can answer as well. What is the hottest place on Earth? So where on Earth has it been measured the highest single day temperature? What is that place? And I know what it is, not because just because I read it somewhere or heard it somewhere, just because we used to live out in California in the Mojave Desert, and right adjacent to the Mojave Desert, as you cross in from Nevada, you'll find Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth as far as a single day temperature, and that temperature was 134 degrees. Now, obviously, if you have the hottest place on Earth, where would you find the coldest place on Earth? What's the coldest place on Earth? If you think about it, we think about maybe Alaska, or maybe in the Northeast, it gets pretty cold. Maybe out in the Swiss Alps, you might see a lot of snow and high mountains. But the actual coldest place on Earth, if you haven't guessed it, is Antarctica. Antarctica has been measured at 136 degrees below zero. And that's a pretty cold place. I don't want to go there. Another question, and dealing with geography. What's the longest river in the world? The longest river in the world. I'll give you just a second to come up with an answer. And some of you immediately perhaps said the Nile River. And if you said that, you're correct. However, there is some disagreement now because of satellites are able to gauge the actual length of the rivers in the world. And they're saying that perhaps now it may be the Amazon. So the Nile River is the longest. Maybe the Amazon, they believe, may exceed the length of the Nile River by 100 miles. So the Nile right now is 4,132 miles, And the Amazon, they believe, is a little over 4,200 miles. So that's the longest river in the world. Now, can you guess maybe what the longest river in the United States is? The longest river in the United States is what river? You know, when I was thinking about this, I thought, oh yeah, obviously it's what? And you're probably saying Mississippi. For those of you like me who guessed the Mississippi River, you're wrong. It's actually the Missouri River, which is 2,341 miles long. And that's the Missouri River. And that was a new one on me. Now, another one of those that you may not guess right away, maybe your second guess, but what's the largest state? The largest state in the United States. We're talking about land mass, the largest state in the U.S. Many of you immediately said Texas. And if you said Texas, you are like many of us who thought Texas was the largest state, but it's actually the state of Alaska has the largest land mass. So that's a tough one. And it kind of caught a lot of us off guard, just like the longest river in the U.S. So with that, what's the largest state? What do you think the smallest state is? The tiniest state in the United States in land mass. And again, some of you may be from the Northeast originally, and you probably guessed right by saying Rhode Island. So Rhode Island is the tiniest or smallest state in the Union. Now, when I was a kid, New York State used to be the largest dairy cow state in the U.S. They had the most dairy cows. But it's no longer number one. New York State is number two. What is the number one state for having the largest number of dairy cows? And if you guessed California, you're right. Now, here's one, and I like this one because I like apples. And so if you're wondering which state has the most apple orchards, you will guess perhaps, some of you may say Georgia, and because of Rome apples, but that's not the case. It's actually Washington State, number one, followed by, and this is shocking to some of us, New York State is number two in having the most apple orchards in the U.S. Interesting fact. So let's go on a little more of the kind of a very general question and a world question. What is the longest highway in the world? And if you don't guess this one, don't be ashamed, because I think nobody knows this one. But it's called the Pan American Highway, which is actually a cluster of highways that stretch throughout North and South America, and is considered the Pan American Highway. And I don't have the actual distance here, but it's pretty long. It's several thousand miles long. How far is the moon from the Earth? When I was a kid, I could probably tell you. But the reality is the moon changes in its orbits a little bit. So as of today, it is just over 237,000 miles from Earth. That's a long way. It seems a lot closer, but 237,000 miles. Next question has to deal also with planets. What is the largest planet in our solar system? The largest planet in our solar system. I had to think about it. I used to know what it was. I went to Mars first, but I know Mars is not the right answer. So if you guessed Mars, you're like me, you're a little off. It's actually Jupiter. So Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. So we're going to change up the category here in our questions. So we're going to go back 100 years in time, from the 2020s now back to the 1920s. Now, in the 1920s, there was an early movement of young women finding their independence, and they had a nickname, and they wore unique clothing. short skirts. They started cutting their hair short and acting very rebellious. But they were called something. And if you can think about what they were called, I want you to go ahead and say it out loud. And if you said flappers, you are correct. The hard question that deals with flappers is, why were they called flappers? And I thought it was because of maybe a way they danced, that was what I thought originally, but that's not the case. So can you guess why they called the girls and the young ladies, rather, in the 1920s, flappers? And here's the answer. Well, they wanted to do their best to be unique and stand out, and so they began wearing their rain boots. These are the rubber rain boots they wore, and they just stuck their feet in them and wore them to the store and everywhere just so people would look at them, just to make a scene, but they wouldn't fasten the fasteners. And the fasteners would flap or flop back and forth, and it would make the flapping sound. And so they called them flappers, and that came from those rain boots they wore out in public, even when it wasn't raining. So that was a little fashion trend they tried to create. Well, now that we have the flappers, they had their male counterparts. So if you were a guy in the 1920s and you were going out with a flapper, what were you called? Does anyone know what that term was? So a flapper male counterpart was called a sheik. Believe it or not, I had to read that because I had no idea, but it was the sheik. Now, also in this time period, cars were just hitting the roads, and the most famous of all was the Henry Ford's Model A or Model T. Now, those are two, but what was Henry Ford's first commercially produced car called? And if you're a guy, you may know it, you may not, because you think about cars all the time. You may be, or maybe a lady who is really a car enthusiast. But those cars today, it was called a quadricycle. It was a combination of bicycle, 4 tires, had no reverse gear, 2 forward gears, but it was called a quadricycle. It didn't make a big hit, big splash, until the Henry Ford's assembly line cranked up and started mass producing affordable cars in that time frame in the 1920s. Let's change gears. Let's go to animals and nature. So animals and nature. So do you know what the fastest bird in the world is? What is the fastest bird in the world? If you guessed falcon, you are correct. But I'm really amazed at how fast the falcon is. They have been recorded going 242 miles an hour in a dive. So 242 miles an hour in a dive after their prey, which is pretty interesting, pretty fast. But what is the fastest land animal? And our granddaughter was so thrilled to learn that the fastest land animal was, and you probably have already guessed it, it's the cheetah. The cheetah can actually run 62 miles an hour. So here in our town, it would be speeding on all the highways if it were let loose out here. But cheetah is the fastest land animal, clocked at 62 miles an hour. So when you have the fastest, what's the slowest? What do you think the slowest animal? This would be a mammal. What is the slowest animal on Earth? And we always think about one animal in particular for being slow, and maybe we've had some words to describe people and using the same term, but it's called sloth. A sloth is the slowest animal in the world. Now let's do some fun facts as I close, and well, we're gonna have lunch in a couple hours. So let's see, what would be the most hot dogs consumed in a contest? And you think about that, and they have the one up in Coney Island. This is the the hot dog eating contest, and they have competitive eaters from around the world show up there to see how many hot dogs they can eat. But I want you to know there's a gentleman named Joey Chestnut. He has been the reigning hot dog eating champ. He has won 12 times the world record, and he currently holds the world record. So other than those 12 world records that he's held, he's also broken his own record. He is now on record eating 71 hot dogs and buns in one sitting. And I think there's a time limit for that, but he's eaten 71 hot dogs. Pretty interesting. And my last fact, which is interesting to some people, I guess. I found it pretty interesting. We were just downtown. I was looking at some photos of the railroad tracks here crossing in our little town, and they're pretty narrow. You can reach your hands across them and just about touch each rail. And I was wondering why they're that size. And if you were to measure a railroad track, so the standard gauge between the tracks is 4 feet 8.5 inches, and that seems like an odd number. Why not make it 4 feet, or why not make it 5 feet? But 4 feet 8.5 inches. Why did they determine railroad tracks should be that size? Does anybody know? Well, it turns out that's the same size that the trains in England come up with. So we followed their size, their measurements of trains in England, or the original prototypes of trains, whatever. They used the standard gauge track with 4 feet 8.5 inches between the two. But where did they get that from? Well, that was from the wagon. The standard width of a wagon between the wagon wheels was 4 feet 8.5 inches on average, and that was a standard that they used when they built their wagons. But why did they use that standard? So you go back a little further. That was actually 4 feet 8.5 inches came from the actual Romans, who built chariots to an exact standard of 4 feet 8.5 inches between the chariot wheels. So if you're ever wondering how we came up with our gauge on our railroads, it goes all the way back to Rome. So that's an interesting fun fact for today, or a group of them actually. I hope you did well on this quiz. It's helped to keep your memory alive and going. I look forward to talking to you soon in person, but if not, we'll also always meet here every Friday on video. So God bless you. Have a great day and a fantastic Friday and a good weekend too as well. Bye.